Part 9. To Bind and Bond Again. Religion, the contract that binds and binds again. The word religion is derived from the Latin ligare, which means to bind, from which words such as ligament and ligature find their roots. Re as a prefix means again. Thus, we have religion as that which binds and binds again. This is the binding contract that adherents make to their respective beliefs, gods, and other components of their religion. There is a classic and esoteric underpinning to this contractual binder that sits atop the knowledge that one must confirm a commitment 3 times to have it become irrevocably binding, which is discernible in many places. Peter denies Christ 3 times. 3 judges sit in judgment on a panel. 3 strikes and you're out in baseball. And, of course, the concept of the Trinity. As to the religious binding as a set of 3, one need only look at the Catholic and Protestant rituals of baptism, communion, and confirmation. By voluntary consent, we bind ourselves to the law of the priest again and again, and for the 3rd time irrevocably, until such time as we, by reasserting our will and intent, release ourselves with conscious purpose, by rescinding and revoking presumed consent and release ourselves from such a contract. Further on, we shall have a look at the way this has been transposed to the secular and legal arena through the metaphors of the sea of commerce under which we are submerged in debt. There we are held by the constructs of maritime law, inclusive of the function of insurance that places a binder on the insured cargo, our spirit, of the commercial vessel, our body, in which we are clothed from birth to death. The primary basis of every religion and spiritual path, whether it is traditional, New Age, or fringe, is that all are founded upon some form or another of the out there concept, where there is a promise of salvation that lies somewhere out there for the believers and adherents. This is characterized as some means or method of being saved by an outside force, benevolent presence, savior, interdimensional Calvary, space brotherhood or otherwise, coming over the next hill just in time, and of course, there is always some path that must be walked, price to pay, priesthood to appease to get entry, codes or laws to follow, so that you prove you are worthy to avoid excommunication. Additionally, the religions also include some element of chosen people syndrome, where we are the chosen and they are the rabble, in comparison to the others. The key is the combination of binding oneself to the law of the priest, and by following it religiously, we can achieve the fulfillment of the promise of salvation for following the law. As we know by now, everything that they say where we are supposed to go is where we are not supposed to go, if we seek true freedom, and wherever they say to stay away from, or things that are said not to do, is what we must choose to do. The word heretic is derived from the Greek heretikos, which is defined as able to choose. Thus, a heretic is one who is able to choose by asserting one's volition and free will. To avoid being labeled a heretic and shunned from the community, one gives up the ability to choose, i.e., gives up one's sovereign free will. Have a look at the recent furor over so-called universal health insurance in the United States. This is the ultimate binder on our life by allowing ourselves to be bound by government-mandated health insurance. Keep in mind that to insure something is to bind it so that it can be hypothecated, projected into the future, in order to monetize it in the present. Additionally, the binder of any type of insurance is really the voluntary act of allowing the underlying ancestral estate to be attached so that any claims made through the public decedent estate can be monetized. In the meantime, Once the Health Care Act was passed and applied, all the lies of choice were quickly evaporated as it became more and more constrictive and without choice as to how one could actually access real health-promoting care. With medical treatments and pharmaceuticals making up 1/6 of the U.S. GDP, no wonder the push for universal health care was part of the agenda for the last 20 years. Because more death and disease equals more monetized debt. The mirror image of all this is choice, to be a true heretic in every sense of the word. More choice equals more freedom, but it is also equal to more responsibility. More responsibility means the progressive reduction leading to full elimination of the "you owe me, it's your fault" syndrome, in which one projects responsibility outside of oneself, always seeking someone who owes us life, and when not delivered, to blame outside of oneself rather than taking full responsibility within. This is the foundation and the corollary of the enemy construct that must be resolved within us in order to achieve true freedom and choice. Thus, rather than focusing outside of ourselves, we must understand that the only way out is the way in. Nobody owes us anything, and there is no one to blame but ourselves. The way in is by taking the volitional act of claiming our life and our estate, metaphorically symbolized as embodying our ka into the physical ba, and getting rid of the interposer, which is an or anu. Eliminating the interposer is done by dispelling the illusion of the bridge and the toll taker in its many guises. The essential binding is the adherence to the law of the priest, now in the form of public civil codes and procedures. There are many subsidiary lines of the priest. These priesthoods now consist of medical priests, judicial priests, legal priests, code enforcement priests, and monetary priests, among others. They all are part of the temple system, each in their own cubicle spread out across the land in many guises. So Ba for body, An for the bridge to cross, and Ka for our true authentic self, combined together is the word Ba'anka, or bank. And what happens when we go to the bank? It always takes its bite, its tithe, its interest, its inflation, its taxation, all of it diminishing and undermining our capacity to be whole and to use our creative energy to build solutions, new realities, new worlds, and anything we choose to undertake and perform. Instead, we allow our lives to be converted to bonded debt instruments that flow through a fictional river as current sea through the banks, while the current of our electrical nature is used to build up a charge that we must pay as a fine in order to discharge over and over. Additionally, as best represented in the origins of Greek mythology and creation stories, there is a distinction between our fate and our destiny, the choice between no choice, fate, and self-directive principle in creating our own lives as we wish and intend, destiny. Fate is what we are bound to as a pre-programmed life path that we dare not stray from, or we will encounter the wrath of the gods, i.e., be branded as a heretic, excommunicated, imprisoned, or put to death. We must toe the line by following the rules and laws of the priest as the archetypal representative in many forms, as the vicarious authority for the gods or God, so that we stay within the constraints of the rules of the gods, as dispensed by their representatives on earth, the priests and the demigods. Over thousands of years and many generations, this has been systematized into the controls and boundaries of the legal system that is now ever increasingly being tightened. To this world system we bind ourselves by oath and repetition, by pledge of allegiance, by daily actions of contracting and recontracting every time we sign a piece of paper, or stand when the name is called and say yes when the judge, clerk, or bailiff asks, Are you John Henry Doe? When we do that, they know what we have really said is, yes, I am the bonded surety for that name, and I herewith pledge my life, liberty, and fortune to be attached as the liable party to all charges that you have deemed necessary in your beneficent capacity as priest of this temple. We come into court with our minds shackled and chained, as they are, while we walk around seemingly free on the streets of the world, directed and controlled by the government that, by definition, is constituted to control our minds. In so doing, we believe it to be the legitimate right of the external authority to thus control our every breath and every step in life, and to bind us to their cult of death and perpetual mortgages as our own pledges of death. Being bound by our fate in this way is exemplified by the myth of Sisyphus, a mere mortal who angered the gods when he aspired to be like them, who they condemned to the eternal fate of having to roll a boulder up a hill only to have it dislodge and roll back to the bottom just before success in the task is achieved, and then have to return to the bottom and begin the task again. Is this not just a metaphor for the existential dilemma many in this world experience in their attempt to roll the boulder of financial bondage up the hill of life, thinking if they could just get it up that last little incline, they will be free at last, only to be thwarted by the many vicissitudes of life over and over again, watching helplessly as the boulder slips by them and tumbles to the bottom of the hill once more? This is discussed in a brief essay by one of literature's leading voices in the topic of existential fate, Albert Camus, in which he describes in detail that it was Sisyphus's abhorrence to death, drudgery, and pain that got him into trouble. Quote, his scorn of the gods, his hatred of death, and his passion for life won him that unspeakable penalty in which the whole being is exerted toward accomplishing nothing. This is the price that must be paid for the passions of this earth. End quote. Yet there lies before us a middle path, a path in which we can integrate our fate with our destiny and emerge as a living being that is not bound and constrained by the laws of the priests and the monitors of the machine. To do so, we must ground ourselves firmly on the land and in our own bodies as our landed estate, one formed of our living substance and eternal presence here and now. We can use what the gods have deemed to be our fate, because therein lie the clues of our real nature, but we must add to it the fire of life and enliven it in order to rise above and beyond the mechanical nature the gods would have us bound to forever. But once again, Greek literature tells us that the fate of those who attempt to become as the gods is to be eternally bound to the earth in toil, labor, and bondage, as represented by another existential character, Prometheus, who disobeyed Zeus by bringing fire to humanity, for which he was condemned to be chained to a mountain boulder and have his liver eaten out every day by an eagle, only to have it regrow overnight and repeat the next day. This is why Rockefeller Plaza has a larger-than-life sculpture called Prometheus Bound in the center of the plaza. This is what they consider to be their God-given right to bind humanity to their will, and by so doing, steal our fire and use it for their own devices as they forge the manacles of our chains in the darkness of their vacuous and soulless chambers. And of course, who is the modern eagle eating our liver on a daily basis? None other than the United States Corporation and all its myriad subdivisions worldwide. Destiny, on the other hand, is what we choose to create out of the substance of our being, our life force, and our own will, put forth by self-directive principle, or sovereign free will, to excel and manifest our true capacities. Sovereign free will is the inner capacity of our eternal standing and has nothing to do with concepts of terrestrial sovereignty. Such concepts are placed within this holographic containment field as just one more carrot on a stick, with our external projection enabling the world system to capture, contain, control, and utilize our passions and our creative urge by virtue of our projection of our inner capacity and authority onto an external template. Thus, our pursuit of sovereignty in the arena of the so-called freedom movement is a distraction and a purposeful misdirection, resulting in such monikers of control as sovereign citizen and the like. This the gods do not like, and so anyone daring to tempt fate and forge his or her own destiny shall encounter much resistance over and over again. The goal with walking out of the matrix is to be in life by integrating our Ba and Ka, our substance, with our being, and to take back control of our own fire of life. The only way to be here, whole, is to be on the physical land, to be on the land and to be in one's landed estate, which is the physical body. We have been lied to for millennia that the body is the dross, that it is evil, sinful, without merit, and only in eschewing the body can we achieve their carrot on a stick called salvation. But when we bind ourselves to the law of the priests, we are lifted off the land and literally out of our bodies. The only place where true law actually exists is on the land. We can look at the entire history of the last 1,000 years of law. It's all about the land. And they who hold the law are only those who hold the land. It's called law of the land for a reason. This is why the so-called Age of Conquest was about bringing civilization to the unwashed, to lift the indigenous stewards of the land off of it and into the civitas containment field of legal and monetary bondage. Have a look around. It appears they did a very good job at achieving this during the last 500 years through the myriad variations of the Trail of Tears, in the Great Binding and the Veils of Forgetfulness, the 9 hells and their ultimate hell, in placing all the king's debtors in the chamber beneath the office of the exchequer. Standing on the land or lost at sea. One cannot be on the land if there is anything between you and the reintegration of your substance and your being. Hence, if one is the bonded surety to a bankrupt franchise, then one is bound to the false earth as Prometheus, to be bereft of the fire of life and sentenced to the endless toil, drudgery, and mind-numbing repetitive tasks of modern virtual life in perpetual debt, to be condemned as Sisyphus to forever roll the financial boulder up the mountain, but to never achieve real freedom due to the elusive and evanescent nature of the game. You are not on the land because only those who are solvent have the standing to stake a claim on the land. In today's terms, that is the whole purpose of the money system, to create an indentured trust that bonds our body, our life force, our genetic code, and our eternal being to the imaginary system of debts, because anyone attached to debt is not whole, is not solvent, and therefore cannot be truly integrated and free. We agree to all this by contract, virtually every day of our lives. We do this by accepting the contractual nexus of the law merchants to bind us to their commercial paper that, by definition, are securitized debt instruments. We allow the continuous presumption of consent to operate in our lives. We are the security by pledge of death. We allow ourselves to be lifted off the land into the artificial construct, the containment field of the civil body, which is a system and construct that originated in ancient history in Egypt, Sumer, and Babylon. It is now structured by and through Rome, which is today's global empire. This is the basis of Roman civil code, to bind the lives and substance of the mass populace. Every franchise has assigned to it a maritime insurance number so that the future labor and production of the franchise can be hypothecated and monetized. To hypothecate something is to bind its value and project that value into the future so that current monetized debt instruments can be issued and circulate as currency. We have mortgaged our future and that of the next 7 generations by the simple stroke of a pen. Imagine that. Imagine how powerful we are to be able to do that. Imagine still how powerful we can be by severing that attachment and reversing the relationship. Our modern language of legal and monetary usage reflects this in many ways. We say we are underwater when in debt. We have our children baptized by the priests by forcing their heads underwater. Every single instrument issued in the franchise name creates a public debt and hidden private bonds that last from 2 to 30 years. These instruments are issued and hypothecated against the underlying value held in the ancestral estate that we have abandoned at birth. The estate has taken control of our estates via these instruments and the value behind them through maritime rules of salvage and claim. We must toil our entire lives in an attempt to keep up with the ever-eluding future settlement of these bonded debts, like Sisyphus and his eternal labor. When we die, even if it appears to be the case for a small minority, as if some can die debt-free, the underlying bonds continue forward, and our hearts are found heavy and unable to pass the scales of Osiris, because the accounting of all this bonded debt is kept by the servant of death, the grim reaper, O's IRS, where O is the representation of the eternally recurring cycle of death and rebirth back into bondage, the eternal void of useless toil in attempting to be free of such bondage, and the cult of death.